Good morning, church. I'm so glad to be here. I want to take a minute and welcome our guest. If you're new here, we're glad you're here. And I want to let you know that today's message and today's sermon is just for those of us who have decided to follow Jesus, those of us who are Christians. So if you're not a Christian, you're non-Christian, you are off the hook today. But I encourage you to pay attention and to listen, because this is, if you are in the future going to decide to follow Jesus, this message is incredibly important. And that's why this question really is so important. Because a lot of times when we ask this question, right? We ask this question: how do we know someone is a Jesus follower? Or how do we know someone is a Christian? How do we know without a shadow of a doubt, with a certainty in mind that person follows Jesus? And usually what we have is a checklist, right? We have a checklist for how we determine someone is a Christian. It usually goes something like this. If you don't have a list mapped out, you probably have a list mapped out in your mind, but mine usually looks like this. Do they go to church? Is usually one of the questions that I ask. Do they pray? Usually I'll sift around in a conversation and try to figure out, do they go to church? Where do they go to church? Do they pray? Do they love Jesus? How do I know they love Jesus? What is it? And usually my checklist is based on what they do. Do they believe the Bible? How do I know for a fact that these people are Christians? But Jesus had a very different standard of how he would define somebody who followed him. He had a very different standard. And it comes to us in John chapter 13 and verses 34 and 35. Now, you and I, we're all familiar with this verse. If you don't know this verse, you should get to know this verse, because this is just one of those incredible passages. It's a great reminder. It's something that you and me, we need to understand, right? The Bible was written to those Christians in that day, but it was also written for us. So we can look at a scripture like this and go, you know what, I can live that out. I can see that. And so Jesus, when he's in this section where he's sitting at the table with his disciples before he's about to die, he gives this long section. It's the only section in the entire New Testament, and John is the only one that records it, is this conversation that happens between Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper. Now, Jesus is participating in the Passover feast with these people, with these disciples, and he's giving them important instructions that they remember. The whole section, chapters 13 through 17, if you haven't read that, you need to go read it, because it is one of those things where there's so much depth, and there's so much, it's so exciting, because you get really down to the nitty gritty of what does Jesus want from me? What does he want me to do as a follower of Jesus? What does he want me to do? How does he want me to live? And so at the beginning of this, chapter 13, he tells them right off the bat, he says, a new commandment. And John in his letter has also said this. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. This is vitally important to the Christian faith. Vitally important to Jesus followers everywhere. That we love one another. Right? And we read this and we go, well, what does that look like? Right? Well, we may say, well, okay, it's serving people or doing this or that or going out of our way or doing something that feels inconvenient. The word that Jesus uses here, that John uses here, is a word that we're very familiar. It's this Greek word, this little Greek word called or pronounced agapao, right? And it is a self-sacrificial love. It is a type of love that puts the needs of others before yourself. That's what it is. It's not a love like, we would define love. We would define love like I love pizza, right? Or I love my wife. If you're a parent, you understand this type of love, right? You understand this self-sacrificial love. Any good parent, any parent who loves their children understands what this word means, understands what it means to love. Because when that child is born, there is not a thing in the world you wouldn't do for it. You don't even know, you don't know what its personality is like. You don't know what they're going to look like. You don't know anything. But you would give your life for that little human being. That's the type of love that we're talking about. And John talks about that in his letter, 1 John. He says that, in fact, in the section we talked about last week. He says that we should be willing to give our lives to lay our lives down for our brothers, just as Jesus has loved. But Jesus says something that's very important right after that. He says, love one another. Just, right? How? Just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. How will people know that I'm a follower of Jesus? By this, right? If you love one another, by this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Now, human nature is this part of us that naturally divides. Well, I've got this idea, and my idea is superior to this other person's idea, and therefore I'm going to hold on to this idea. And you know what? The person next to them gets the same idea. My idea is superior to this person. All of a sudden, there's a divide. There's division. Because there's a superiority complex that runs naturally in human beings. And what Jesus does is he breaks it down, and he tells us to live humbly. Right? To love one another would mean, to love my brother would mean for me to put my own pride aside and serve in whatever case that I should. Now, here's the deal. When we assume something about someone's faith, and we base it on a checklist, right? So in other words, we can't assume something about someone's faith based on a checklist. What someone does not define their Christianity. It doesn't. Is it a very big part of Christianity? Yes, but it's not everything. And a lot of times we place it in this pedestal, right? And we say, you know what they do? They go to church, they pray, they love Jesus, they believe the Bible, they preach the Bible. And you can do all that. But the defining factor is something much, much bigger. It's love. It's love that comes from a pure heart. It's love that says, I am not the most important person. There are people that are more important than me. And could you imagine what the church would look like if everybody sitting here today had that kind of mentality? I'm not as important as I think I am, but everybody else is more important than I am. Could you imagine how we would serve one another? But we assume somebody's Christianity based on a checklist we've made up in our own minds. And it's just natural. It's just natural. Well, I want to know if somebody believes this thing. I mean, I used to do this. I had a neighbor, probably 10 years ago, and I was still living at home. And the neighbor across the street, he went to another church. I had no idea of anything about this guy, but I started talking to him naturally because that's just what I do. When I don't know somebody and I keep seeing them, and it makes me uncomfortable when I don't know anything about them. So my natural inclination is, well, I'm going to go talk to this person and make me feel a little more comfortable if I know something about it. So I started talking to him, and he started asking me questions, and I started asking him questions, and finally we got to the part where we start talking about Christianity. You know, I like to pry a little bit. You know, I like to figure out, okay, well, what's the depth on this? You know, how far does it go? Does he just go to church, or is he actually living out this faith? I want to know. I want to understand. So in order to aggravate the argument a little bit, like some of us like to do, I pried a little more. I said, well, what do you believe about baptism? Because I just knew once he said that he went to Grace Community Church, I was like, oh yeah, I could pry on this. I could dig this up. You know, I can aggravate the conversation just a little more. I can get him to talk. I can get him angry. I can get him stirred up. And I use that to assume something about someone else. Not that I was right or wrong or indifferent. But I assumed something about somebody. He's a good guy, great guy, lived a solid life. The more I got to know him, the more I learned about him, the more I was like, man, this guy is the real deal. But when we assume, when our intentions are not right? We start putting it this way. Do they fit our standards, right? Do they fit our standards? Right? Do they fit our standards of Christianity? Right? What is a Christian supposed to look like? What is a follower of Jesus supposed to look like? I know what he's supposed to look like. I have this mental checklist in my mind of what Christian values and morals are. You know, Christians, Jesus followers, are called to a higher standard, morally, spiritually, and relationally. And if we combine those three, right? And here's where I put it on the scale, right? I put love at the top of everything because that is the motivating factor for everything I do is love. Not always, but most of the time. like all of you, right? Most of the time we love. Most of the time we try to do good things. Most of the time we try to live right. Most of the time we try to avoid sin. Most of the time we try to treat people kindly. Most of the time we try not to assume things about other people. We try not to judge. We try not to fit them to our own standards. Do they fit God's standards? Do they fit the biblical standards? Do they look like what the New Testament church told me, tells me, shows me what a Christian is supposed to look like, not my own standards? And a lot of times we do it subconsciously. It's not even something well thought out. We just do it subconsciously. We have this list and we want to see, we want to know. It's curiosity. It's natural. And here's the bottom line. The thing you got to know. The thing I want you today, when you walk out of this door and you walk into the world, you need to remember this. When you're in a conversation with somebody, who's a Christian or non-Christian or agnostic or an atheist, keep this in mind. When you're in that conversation and you're trying to understand and you're trying to learn, it's not only determined by what someone does. Not only. It's not the only thing. But by how they love. How do they love? Are they self-sacrificing? Are they kind? Do they treat people well? Do they align with what biblical standards are, bias or not? Objectively, when I look at the scriptures, does this person fit what does Jesus himself described? And so John, writing in his letter, mirrors this basic concept. In 1 John chapter 3, 17, we're gonna work through verse 24 today. But John mirrors this concept. In fact, he carries over the concept from what he talked about in a previous chapter when he talked about a new commandment I give to you, right? Well, when he starts chapter 3, he starts this contrast between sin and righteousness and children of God and children of the devil. And he begins this contrast to help us understand what a child of God looks like and what a child of evil looks like. Because what you have in the region of Ephesus at this particular time is a group of, Gnostics called the Nicolaitans, which were disrupting and saying, look, no, you're doing it wrong. This is the way to follow Christianity. This is the way to follow Jesus. Jesus doesn't exist. Jesus is not the Son of God, but we do it this way. This is superior spirituality, right? And so John writes this letter to try to help them understand what it is a child of God actually looks like. What do they look like? What do they do? How do they act? How do they pretend? What do they confess? What do they breathe out of their mouth? In an earlier section, he says, the one who confesses that Jesus is the Son of God is of God, right? That individual, only by the Spirit of God, could say that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And in another passage, he says, back down in chapter 3, he says that anyone who confesses that Jesus Christ came in the flesh is of God. So he's running these principles. And then you see this little word, abide or remain, combined with this word, love, that's intermingled into the text. And it drives this point down. When he gets to verse 11 and verse 16, he starts to tell us what it actually looks like. What does love look like? What is the motivating factor? And he gives us this illustration of Cain and Jesus. Both involve death. One is motivated by hate. The other motivated by love. Both in some way involve death. And so John gives us this picture of what it looks like. And he says, look, but I'm going to go even further than that. I'm going to go a little further. And I'm going to talk about what it really looks like to love. What a Christian looks like when he abides in God, when he abides in the Spirit of God, when he does what God calls him to do. This is what he looks like, right? So he brings this concept out, a concept that they're struggling with, these Christians in this particular area. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, it closes his heart against him. How does the love of God abide in him? Again, an identifying marker of how we're determining that someone is a Jesus follower, that someone is a Christian, that someone is doing their best, right? If he sees, well, this brother over here has a need for something. He doesn't really need it. He's just trying to get ahead, right? He's just trying to get ahead of me. I went to a gas station. It was probably a couple months ago, and it was pouring down rain outside. One of those days where we'd had this long stretches where there was no rain. And it finally started raining. It was raining all night. And I pull up to the gas station because I don't know if I was doing something here at the church or doing something somewhere else, but I was going to go in and get a Rockstar. And I was going to put a couple gallons of gas in. And I turn into the parking lot and I see this lady off to the side. And she's got a handful of stuff. I don't even know what was in there. And I can see, she's got kind of muffled up shoes, and I could tell by the way that she looked, and I could tell by the way that she was acting, and I knew, how you know when people are going to ask you for money. Like, you're driving along and you're like, oh man, don't hit a red light because that guy's standing on the corner and I don't want to give him any money or feel guilty. Or you get to the light and you're like, don't make eye contact. He's going to come up to the car and think he's going to get money. Well, that's what was in my mind. Was like, I know exactly what she's going to do. My anticipation was spot on. As soon as I pulled up, I didn't even see her. I didn't even know where she went. I pulled in. It's like she disappeared. And then all of a sudden she appeared again. And she comes over and she says, do you have any spare change? I said, I really don't have any spare change. I said, but I can buy you something if you need it. Do you need something? Is there something I can buy you? Is there something that you need that I can get to you? And what she asked me for was kind of strange. She asked for 2 pairs of gloves and 2 cups of coffee. And I remember just thinking to myself, that's kind of odd. And I'm thinking to myself, what is she going to use 2 cups of coffee for? Right? 2 pairs of gloves and 2 cups of coffee? And so I asked her, I said, what do you need 2 pairs of gloves? And she puts her hands out. And her hands are just tore to shreds. They're ripped to shreds. I don't know what, it looked like she'd been soaking her hands in a cold bath for hours, is what it looked like. And her hands were all messed up. You could tell, and it brought compassion upon me. And so I said, okay. So I walked into the store, and as I'm thinking, I'm like, what does she need 2 cups of coffee for? What in the world does she need 2 cups of coffee for? I mean, I got her 2 pairs of gloves, and I got her this large coffee, and I walked out, and I handed it to her, and she said, thank you. And she said, God bless, and she walked away. And I finished filling up my tank, and I'm watching her. She was walking down the street, and she's not drinking the coffee. She's just holding it in her hand like this. She's trying to keep her hands warm. She's trying to keep her hands warm with the gloves and with the coffee. And I thought to myself, why didn't I get her 2 cups of coffee? Why didn't I do more? Why did I question it? Why didn't I just give her what she needed? She has no relation to the church, but I felt compassion, and I shouldn't have questioned it. As soon as she asked, I should have just done it, because I knew she was misfortunate. But I have this stereotype in my mind of homeless people, that they're just going to ask for money and they're going to go use it on drugs and alcohol and this and that and the other, and that's what's in my mind. And my assumption about somebody caused me not to love, caused me not to give as much as I could. If you have the world's good and you see a brother in need, you see a fellow man, a fellow human being, a neighbor, somebody who's misfortunate, and you don't help, you close your heart to him. How does the love of God abide in you? How? By that standard, maybe I'm not doing as much as I can. Maybe you're not doing as much as you can. But he doesn't stop there. He says, little children, let us not love in word or in talk. Right? The way I illustrate is just like, I love so-and-so. I love them. I give them whatever they need. Time comes to help. It's like, it looks like they got somebody else to help them. Looks like they got somebody else to do. But he says, look, but indeed, in energy, this is the Greek word energeo, which is where we get our word energy from. In works, in our work, and in truth, right? In authenticity. Authentically, not just giving so you can show people, look what I did. But because it's what God expects from somebody who follows Jesus. To give, help with what you can. I'm not saying give everything you have. I'm not saying give all your money. I'm not saying don't live the way that you want to live. But I'm saying help where you can help. That's what John is saying. If you help where you can help, the people who were in this Gnostic cult, so to speak, these antichrists, these individuals weren't helping anybody. And the Christians were trying to define, because in chapter 4 and verse 1, he says, don't believe every spirit, my beloved, but test the spirits to see if they're from God. And that's where he says that if anyone who confesses that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, came in the flesh, he is of God. Not just to believe what everybody says or does, but to watch their actions. To watch our actions. You know what this makes me do? It makes me reflect. It makes me look at my own life, say, not point the finger at somebody else. Well, they're not doing this or they're not doing that. What am I doing wrong? What could I do better? How could I love people better? How could I love people in my community, my church? How could I love my family better? I don't have time to do everything, but I can put in a little more effort. And the intentions of a Christian who decides to live and to do authentically the way Jesus asked us to do it is doing what pleases God. He says by this type of action, by this type of intent, by this type of living, we shall know that we are of the truth and reassure our heart before him. For whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows everything. So in other words, you're not fooling anybody. Whether you do it because you feel an obligation or you do it because you really want to do it or because you love to do it, God knows everything. God knows what your intentions are. God knows what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. God knows what you're supposed to do and you're not supposed to do. And if we're all being honest with ourselves, when we do something wrong, when we sin, when we mess up, it's not a question of if I did I do something wrong. It's I know I did something wrong and I'm afraid to admit that I did something wrong. But you're not fooling anybody. I'm not fooling anybody. He says it right here. For whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart. So whether good intention or bad intention, if you don't feel like you did enough, if you tried to do the right thing, if your intention was honest, if your intention was in truth and authenticity, God knows that. And he's not questioning it. And the people who were questioning, the people in John's day, were questioning the intentions of the heart, which they did not know. It's a real game changer for us, isn't it? We can't judge the thoughts and intentions and heart. We can't judge all that stuff because we don't know. And I think we all try to do that, but we have this natural anticipation, this natural assumption when we see someone who is a certain character or looks like a certain way or dresses a certain way or acts a certain way. We assume things about those people instead of trying to look at it objectively. What may have caused that situation? I don't know if I don't ask. I don't know if I don't open myself up and say, hey, how you doing today? Simple conversation. That opens up needs, that opens up desires, that shows love, that shows care. That does what God says to do, that does what a Christian needs to do. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God. And whatever we ask, we receive from him because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him. Now, I want to talk about this for just a minute, this commandments idea, because sometimes we have this idea that, we go to the Bible, it's a list of laws and rules and regulations and things to find. That's kind of the idea that we have when we go to the scriptures. Well, we got to find all these things in the scriptures to make sure we're doing everything right and that we're doing everything and that's not a wrong intention, but I got to say this. The Bible is not a rule book. It's a guide. It's a map. I'm in a tight spot. What do I do? What do I know I can do? I read the scriptures. I understand the scriptures. I'm in a really hard place right now. I don't know what to do. And you start to reflect on that guide, that map, that visual image you have of something. If you were going to take a trail, right? You probably have some kind of map. A trail you've never been on before. You probably have some kind of map with you. You're on a journey through life where you don't know what's going to happen the next minute. And the only way to begin making good decisions, to begin making the right decisions, to start moving in the right direction, is to look at the map and start understanding, where have I failed? That I can make changes, that I can transform by the power of God to my own life. We keep his commandments. But Jesus said, love one another, just as I have loved you. What does that look like? Well, Jesus certainly gave himself on a cross. Jesus certainly showed the perfect image of love. It's talked about there in John 13. It's talked about in 1 John chapter 3 and verses 14 through 16. It's talked about this idea of how Jesus loved humanity. We keep his commandments and do what pleases him. What's his command? To love one another. But he doesn't stop. He says, and this is the commandment we believe. Right? There's two things here. First, that we believe in his son, Jesus Christ. And number two, love one another. The only way to the Father is through Jesus. Amen? The only way to get there is if you believe. And I'm not just talking about believe like, oh yeah, I believe that. But think about a time you really believed in something. You know, I don't know if I've told this story here or not. When my brother was about, he was probably 3 years old. And he was running around the house, and he was punching walls, and he was punching people, and he was wearing a Superman cape, and he was just being destructive. And I was getting annoyed because I was trying to watch my cartoons. And so I'm sitting there watching TV, and I get this idea in my head. Well, I'm going to play a trick on him. So I said, hey, Chris, there's a mirror at the end of our hall, big 3-foot mirror, the long, skinny ones. And I told him, I said, hey, if you jump through that mirror, you could become Superman? Oh, boy, did he believe me. And he did it. He did it. He ran right into that mirror. He shattered the whole mirror, by the way. Didn't have any cuts or scratches on him, but started crying. And it was the funniest thing in the world. And it reminded me that when you really believe in something, doesn't matter if it's crazy or unrealistic or illogical, if you believe in that thing, you're going to do something about it. If you believe in that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, you're going to do something about it. If you believe that you need to love your brother, you're going to do something about it. If you believe, you will act. If you truly believe in your heart of hearts, you will act in that manner. You will take action. It won't be a question. It won't be, well, should I do this? It's like, no, I know I need to do this. I'm going to do this because I believe if I do this thing, I'm going to get this. I may get this outcome, and then you put that on the flip side. You make a decision, a bad decision, and you don't think it through, but you believe in that thing. And the outcome is not at all what you expected it to be. Your decision was wrong. Your decision was not in favor of love. Your decision was not in favor of somebody else's interests. Your favor wasn't of your own interests. And you made a decision that caused you a consequence. What John is telling them here, he's like, look, these are two defining qualities, right? We believe in the name of Jesus Christ and we love one another, just as he commanded us, just as Jesus commanded us to do. We do those things. That's how we know. That's how we know. The whole letter says we know. Read the book of 1 John. Read the whole book of 1 John. You'll see it all over the place. It's littered. The whole book is littered with this idea of how we know that we are of God. Whoever keeps his command and abides in God and God in him, by this we know that he abides in us by the Spirit whom he has given us. It's powerful. It's powerful. The way we look at other people has to be with the intention of love. The way that we guide ourselves in that manner is by first looking to God and say, God, well, what does God want me to do? It might not be an overnight transformation. I think that's another thing that we could spend a significant amount of time talking about. It's not about an overnight transformation, but it's about incremental changes that lead you to holiness, that lead you to the resurrection, that leads you into a relationship with God. It's little increments. It's not overnight change. And anybody who's studied with people or anybody who's seen a Christian grow, they know it's not an overnight. It's incremental, one thing at a time. That becomes something much, much bigger. And that's why it's about someone, it's about how someone loves, not only what someone does. It's about how that person sees God and then how they love others. So I've got two reflections for you this morning. I've got two reflections, some things that I think from the message that we can think on just a little longer, some things that we can take with us through our week, some things that we can meditate about, we can pray about, some things that I thought were some takeaways that I myself had that I thought were very, very helpful. Number one, love forces us to reflect rather than to judge. If we really love, it really puts the spotlight on us, right? If we understand the meaning of the word, if we understand the effects of that, like I would say, maybe helping someone with a few dollars might not change their life, but it may have an impact, because maybe you were the 10th or 12th or 13th or 14th person who's driven by and not giving them anything. Or maybe they haven't had anything, but they get that for a couple dollars and they're able to go, you don't know how something is going to impact somebody's life. Love forces us to reflect upon our actions, to reflect upon where am I going, what am I doing, why am I doing it? And causes us to act in a different manner. Number two, love requires me to act when I feel it is inconvenient. I think that what John would tell us is that sometimes, when we see that brother or sister in need, it might feel inconvenient, right? God loving us, or God blessing us, or God doing something for us might feel, we would think, right, that might feel inconvenient for God. But I don't think God loves the way we love. I think God has a totally different definition of love and understanding of love. And when he's trying to help us understand is that if we follow Jesus, if we choose to follow Jesus, if we make that decision to follow Jesus, our life changes incrementally. We begin to love in a different way. We begin to look at life differently. Our perspective changes. We start to see things from how Christians in the first century saw them. We start to see things from the angle of God. We start to think about things we never thought about before. And we begin to become the person that God intended us to be. Love requires me to act when I feel it's inconvenient. I hope that this message was helpful for you this morning. I know we're going to sing a song of invitation, and if you have a need of any kind, we encourage you to either, you can come and sit on the front pew, or you can tell one of our wonderful caring elders here. They would be happy to take your needs. You can also fill one of those yellow cards, and hand it to somebody, and they'll make sure that an elder gets it. If you have a need of any kind, please come forward as we stand and sing.
My eyes